So last week, I thought this story was so important, I snuck it into the Big Five on Friday. It was on Friday's Big Five, where we discussed that over the course of last week, two of Canada's banks got dinged with massive fines. Now, Canada's Financial Intelligence Agency, FINTRAC, handed down a $1.3 million fine against CIBC for non-compliance with money laundering and terrorist financing measures. That fine came just days earlier last week. RBC was given a $7.4 million fine for the same infraction, right? Non-compliance with money laundering, terrorist financing measures. I heard these stories, so we got to dig a little bit deeper into this. It's our pleasure to welcome back Garry Clement onto the program, former director of organized crime investigations and author of Undercover: Inside the Shady World of Organized Crime and the RCMP. Garry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So last week, let's start off with this. What do our listeners, what do Canadians need to know about these two fines handed down from FINTRAC to some of Canada's most important banks?
Well, I think it's got to be put into perspective. These fines have been levied against most of the banks in the United States and the UK now over the course of the last 5 years. In Canada, I think our regulator has given, and seeing I work in a bank, I think we've got basically a free pass where we've been put on notice for a number of things. What you're looking at here, in fairness to the banks, is that it's not a case that they don't have AML controls or anti-money laundering controls in place. It's really a case of where a certain number of transactions were missed as far as filing a suspicious transaction report. And what it may have been is that the bank took the position that they didn't, really have enough reasonable grounds to believe they should be filed. And once the regulator looked at them, they disagreed and levied a fine. And I think also the message is that, we've had a free pass. I mean, legislation has been in place for a number of years. And what we're seeing now is the regulator is not going to give any leeway if our institutions, including ours, are not meeting what they feel is an appropriate standard. Fines are going to be levied. I think also it's important to understand, and that the listeners understand, commencing next year, the banks actually are having to pay a complete cost of the compliance arm of FINTRAC, and we're all being levied on that. So, it's important to note that banks are playing a pretty important role in the fight against money laundering. What I would suggest to you, though, which is disheartening, is that the government did a proportionate amount of investment in enforcement and prosecution, we might end up getting back to an effective regime. As you know, it's been well publicized that the RCMP is extremely weak on the federal side, and we are falling far short in the international community. And that's all because we're lacking in our legislation, in our enforcement, and in our prosecution.
Yeah, Garry, they say timing is everything. So I wonder if there's anything behind the timing of all this, and you're very right to bring up what's happened in other countries. And, that we've seen these types of fines levied against banks in other countries. But why now? Why did this happen last week of all weeks? Is there anything that we can glean from the timing of it all?
Well, I think there's been lots publicized recently about Canada's failures. That is well recognized in the international community. We are about to undergo a complete review of our Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act, which is going to be going to a parliamentary committee very shortly. And so I think all of that has played into what's happening now.
We're with Garry Clement, former director of organized crime investigations at the RCMP, also the author of Undercover: Inside the Shady World of Organized Crime and the RCMP. Garry, I have seen some people make connections between these stories and these fines from FINTRAC and the recent trial of Cameron Ortis, who is an RCMP officer that was accused and convicted of trying to sell secrets to alleged money launderers. I've seen those connections that people are trying to make it. Do you make those same connections?
No, I think that's fraught with danger to go down that road.
Mm-hmm.
They are two separate incidents and have nothing to do with one another at all. The bottom line is, and I think this is something that all Canadians need to recognize. Right now, if you look at the impact of China on this country, the impact of India on this country, the impact of Iran on this country, we really need to get our house in order. And I think finally, and I use the term and underline finally, I think it's starting to be recognized that we really, from a government perspective, a legislative perspective, we've got to do a far better job because what you're seeing is a fentanyl crisis, 103,000 deaths since 2021. Vancouver is now a supplier of fentanyl. These things have to be fixed and fixed fairly quickly. It's impacting us economically. It's impacting us as far as our reputation on the international stage. And the bottom line is money laundering can't occur without the gatekeepers, and that's banks, lawyers, and accountants. And we are ripe with money laundering in this country.
So there's the connections, right? You're making them right there. The fentanyl crisis goes to money laundering. I've heard it before. You got to follow the money. So
exactly.
So is this an indication that the turning the blind eye that's happened in this country now for decades, that is finally ending?
I would suggest at least it's a start, definitely. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, and I may be wrong in this, but I don't think that is the end of the fines that we're going to see in the coming weeks or months.
Where else does this lead, Garry? You mentioned foreign actors, bad actors that are not Canada's allies. You just listed them. You just listed a bunch of them, right? And how they play into this story. So where else does it lead?
I would hope, and that's all I can do at this stage, there's a good indication that I'm going to be asked to testify before the House of Commons Committee. So I would hope that our politicians finally recognize that this is an issue that we can no longer ignore and that we have to do something about it, so it leads to a commensurate contribution to either changing the RCMP completely or investing and controlling a federal aspect of that force. So we got an investigative capacity. I hope it leads to prosecution or prosecutors being engaged that are focused 100% on this whole area. And I hope we look at the weaknesses in our legislation and our sentencing guidelines, because if we don't, this is not going to go away, and it's only going to get worse.
Garry, the back to the fines: $7.4 million RBC, $1.3 million against CIBC. Is it high enough? Because we know what the banks make every quarter. The Canadian banks, they're rolling in money. Are these fines actually enough to act as a deterrent to bad behavior?
Well, I think it put them on notice. Is it punitive? On the appearance to the average taxpayer is punitive. Let's be honest, you just hit the nail on the head. We've seen billion-dollar fines of some of our banks in the U.S. I hate to say it, but it's pocket change. I've said for decades, and I still stand behind this, terrible thing to say, but I don't think we'll ever 100% clean up our institutions until we put somebody in handcuffs at an executive level.
Garry, we have to leave it there. A lot of insight over the last segment. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Garry Clement is author of Undercover: Inside the Shady World of Organized Crime and the RCMP.